I'm really excited about this next fireside chat. It's guaranteed to be an A+ conversation about the anatomy of an agent in enterprise-grade autonomy. I'm so happy to introduce Scott with Anthropic and VentureBeat's own Michael, who is also the author of the AGI Weekly newsletter. Make sure you subscribe to that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Nunez. I'm the editorial director of VentureBeat, and I'm thrilled to welcome Scott White, product lead for Claude AI at Anthropic. Scott is at the forefront of transforming how we think about AI, not just as a tool that answers questions, but as a true virtual collaborator that can work alongside teams for hours at a time. He's been instrumental in developing Claude 4, which was recently released, and that model also achieved a remarkable 72.5% on the SWE-bench coding benchmark. Everyone, please welcome Scott to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So Scott, I'd love to start this conversation with just sort of the evolution of these models and sort of where we are now. I know it's been a big couple of weeks. We were just talking about that backstage. A year ago, we were all really excited about how chatbots could write emails. Now we're talking about how AI can code for 7 hours straight. Help us understand this journey and sort of what's fundamentally changed in how we think about AI assistants becoming actual collaborators.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's fun. My experience at Anthropic is kind of tracking the evolution of these models over the last couple of years and how inexorably intertwined the product experience and what is unlocked in terms of applications are with the models and their capabilities. So if I reflect back to when I started, it was the Claude 2 family of models, and what we really built was a box that allowed you to have access to a model. And I think coding is actually the best sort of use case to think about and track what this evolution looked like. A year ago, or maybe over a year ago, a little over, the main way that coding was adopted was through autocomplete in an IDE. So very much like where people were already working, very local to what they were doing in a small context, and it would complete the line that you're at. That's what the model was capable of. And so that's how it was integrated into the tools that people were using. And then if you fast forward like 6 months after I started or something, the Models 3.5 Sonnet released, and it was now capable of writing entire functions or mini applications. And the exciting thing was that that unlocked new product surface areas that we could take advantage of that intelligence. And so we launched Artifacts basically a year and a little bit ago, in June last year. And that took advantage of the fact that Claude could write an entire application. The application, bespoke user interface for users to do things with Claude. And we could only launch that because the model was now good enough at writing code to unlock that new product feature. Now you fast forward to a couple months ago, we launched Claude 4. We launched it alongside Claude Code, which is now a fully sort of remote agentic software engineer, right? And it is the kind of thing that the things that mattered a year ago when you have autocomplete in an IDE, latency, that doesn't matter as much because you're now delegating tasks to a virtual software engineering agent that is asynchronously going off and doing a bunch of work, writing a bunch of code, analyzing an entire code base, maybe searching the internet to find API documentation for you to then use to make those changes, issuing a pull request, and then actually getting comments from people on the pull request, taking those comments, and then iterating on the code based on those comments. That is like an entire agentic process in the background that was not possible 6 months ago. And that product now is only possible because of the intelligence of the model. And so that's the dynamic that's been interesting for me to adjust to and see is when you are developing the model, entire new products become possible, and you only see that early when you're building that model, and then you can build those products that take full advantage of the intelligence. And if I think about what the key things that unlocked that evolution over the last year, one is model intelligence, two is tools, and the model accessing those tools and being able to use those tools with that intelligence, tools like web search, tools like editing code bases, tools like the model context protocol, and integrating with various systems. And then lastly is the product surfaces that take advantage of tools and the model intelligence. And the sort of collection of those three things working together, I feel is you can see the shape of chatbot to agents by virtue of those things being deployed and delivered together.
Awesome. I'd love to just kind of double click on that for a second. You mentioned model intelligence and specifically function calling being kind of a big element, I guess, of what's possible with Claude with Code. Can we maybe help people understand or even just get started? We were talking about this backstage as well. Agents are super exciting, but they can be a little bit overwhelming for people that want to just get involved. Tell us a little bit about sort of what these terms are first of all.
Yeah.
Agent, workflow, LLM with tools, and just how people can get started with Claude Code. Claude Code.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I think about breaking down a few of these components, the first one is just the large language model, right? Claude. You go to claude.ai and you can speak to Claude. You can ask it a question, issue it a query. It will take that, it will use its reasoning model, and then it'll provide a response to you. Then on top of that, you add tools. So a model with tools might be a Claude with web search, and I might ask it, what's the weather in San Francisco today? The model itself doesn't know the weather in San Francisco. It's a pre-trained and fine-tuned model that doesn't have the weather today in its knowledge base, but it can use the tool. And so I ask it that question, it uses the tool, it reasons about the response, and then it gives me the weather. The next thing is a workflow, which I think of as a deterministic process that probably an engineer will be building or someone might be building within a product at their company. But the idea is you want like a very deterministic outcome. Like if you're running payroll at a company, you don't want that to be non-deterministic. You want that to be on rails, but you still might have Claude in the loop to do something like take a physical piece of paper, extract key values, and then like plug them into that deterministic process. So it's like logic, gates, and a very defined outcome. The last thing though is agents are not necessarily workflows. They might have a workflow within it, but I think about an agent as something that has a goal, and then it can just do many things to accomplish that goal, and it can iterate over tools, over an environment, getting customer feedback or user feedback, but really it's a sort of non-deterministic or quasi-deterministic process where it's getting information, reasoning over the information it has, deciding to do more things, and then ultimately iterating until it feels like it's accomplished that goal. So that's how I sort of break down the components, and I think, again, it tracks model intelligence, where like a year ago, the model was only intelligent enough to answer a question and maybe use one or two tools to answer that question. Then the model became intelligent and people had enough tools to implement the model into structured workflows within their business. And then only once the model became intelligent enough can it actually reason over a large number of tools that it needs to use to iterate over and over and over to then get to an outcome. So I think we're now in a place where agents are not only like components of the applications that people are building, but also entire applications themselves and agents working with other agents. And so again, model intelligence and the tools that it has unlocks these new sort of paradigms.
I've seen a really great sort of representation of this called Way of the Code by Rick Rubin, who's this world-class music producer. He's worked with Johnny Cash and the Beastie Boys and Outkast and a million other artists. I think Bruce Springsteen, among others. That is a really cool example, I think, of what is possible with Claude Code. But I know you're working with a lot of big companies as well. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us maybe about some projects or real-world examples of people actually putting this stuff to use or, deploying this at the enterprise level?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are examples of customers that are taking Claude and implementing it into workflows that are either ad hoc or very structured. I think of like a company like Novo Nordisk is creating these sort of clinical reports that used to take, I think, like 10 weeks or on the order of weeks, and are now doing it in like 10 minutes by integrating with a lot of research and tools internally. And the ROI on something like that is, it's orders of magnitude. But it's also companies like GitLab doing a lot of productivity within their organization. So everything from using Claude for Enterprise to do RFPs for their sales team, or write technical documentation, or actually, write the code, underneath the systems that are powering GitLab. So these are a variety of different use cases, and the fun thing is that we have different solutions, our API and Claude for Enterprise, so you get to see all these non-technical people building these early agents for themselves to solve problems that are close to their hearts at work. But you also have engineers taking these and implementing them into core business processes at the organization, or building products that they then give to their end users, like Intuit, using Claude to provide end users tax advice, right? That's something I've actually used as an end user. And so it's fun to see all three of those. And I think also Anthropic is customer zero for a lot of what we're building. And it's notable that I think like 90% of Claude Code was written by Claude Code nowadays. And I am a product manager. I am not a professional software engineer, but this week is our hack week. And I am building like full production features now. And I no longer think about my job as writing a PRD and trying to convince like someone to do something or design something. The first thing I do is, can I build a workable prototype of this on our staging server, and then like share a demo of it actually working, get intuition internally about the feature, whether it feels good, whether we have conviction that we want to ship it, and then ultimately we'll decide from there whether we want to ship it. That's me changing the way that I think about my job now, because I have access to this tool and it is now going to land in production. And so that's like, we are an enterprise using our own tool to change the way that we think about the products that we're shipping because we have access to the tool that we built. So that's been super exciting and fun for me.
Wow. I just one more question on sort of how you think about building these agents. Just any advice for prompt engineering, or how you think about kind of getting started, those initial, like telling the computer what to do, telling the agent what to do. Any advice for the audience on just sort of how to approach that task? Keep it simple, get detailed. Which do you prefer, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think starting small and incrementally building up from there. As I think about even my experience this week building features with Claude Code, it's always easier to start with the smallest thing that you know might work, that you can build upon over time. And so don't try to build an entire agentic system or entire agent from scratch. Build the component of it, make sure that that component works, then build a next component that might work with the first component. So do it sort of iteratively. But ultimately, the magic of these models are that they reason and can use tools, and you can describe to it the thing that you are trying to do, and it will ultimately do that. So much like you might go into a meeting with a collaborator and brainstorm, the problem that you're trying to solve, you should treat the model like that thought partner. Work on the requirements first, break the requirements down into the subcomponent pieces, and then start tackling one of those components. Like, the global context is equally important for it to understand ultimately what am I trying to get to, but then like starting local in a small part of it. That is one component of it. The next component of it is, once you've built it, actually evaluating whether it's worked. And I like to say sort of internally sometimes, like, evals are the new PRD. And so evaluations, are just a way of determining whether the model is doing what you want it to do. And that's like a new way of thinking as you're building agents or as you're building products that use large language models. You have to make sure that it's ultimately doing what you want. If you're not using a large language model, you can encode exactly what you want to have happen, right? It's very deterministic. But once you introduce that large language model, it introduces a bit of that non-determinism. You need a language to determine whether it is doing well, whether that's feedback that you're collecting from your customers or your other users internally, or whether it's evaluations, which are just the way of encoding what the task is that the model is trying to do, and then grading it on its ability to do that task. You mentioned SWE-bench. That is a well-known eval for software engineering. Mm-hmm. But as things become more sophisticated, and as people build their own agents internally, they can't just rely on the benchmarks or evals that exist in the market. They end up getting more complex than that, and they end up getting more bespoke to your company. And just like you have a product that you're trying to build that is, trying to deliver a very specific outcome to your customer, you want your evals to be as close to that as possible. So if I'm trying to build a sales transcription engine or something, I want my evals to be about sales transcription, not just, general intelligence.
Sure, yeah. And, we're hearing that more and more, I think, about a lot of these evals and sort of the benchmarks in which we sort of, evaluate these models. I want to make sure we spend some time on MCP. So I would say vast majority of the phone calls I have during the week, MCP is brought up. So a lot of enterprises interacting with Claude seem to lean on this. Can you kind of explain sort of what that advantage is for you guys, and maybe for those that are unfamiliar, sort of what MCP is and why it's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So MCP stands for the Model Context Protocol, and I've been talking a bit about tools, and you think about tools as things that can both do things for you. So if I have a tool that allows the model to go look at Salesforce and update a record in Salesforce, that is like a tool that I gave it. But it also can be used just to retrieve information. I talked about web search as being a tool to retrieve that information. You might have like a internal knowledge repository of your documents, and you want to build a tool that allows Claude to go and search those documents. The Model Context Protocol I think of as like the USB-C for integrations to get more context to applications that you're building or Claude. They need all of this context, and they need all of these tools to build these agents and to build these workflows. And before the Model Context Protocol, which is an open protocol that Anthropic pioneered, that is that sort of translation layer between what the tools are and what the application that you're trying to build to use those tools is, you would have to build point-to-point integrations. So if I wanted to sync in my documents, I wanted to sync in Salesforce data, I wanted to sync in information from my customer support repository, I as a company would need to build an integration between that knowledge repository and my application, and I would need to build 3 different versions of them. And then a different company wanting to do the same thing would need to go and build 3 different versions of those same integrations for themselves. But now with remote MCP, what you can do is build the connectivity between those 3 applications. And because it is an open source protocol, now those applications, those tools, the prompts underlying how the integrations should work are now available for any other company to go and take and then implement into their system. So as long as there's an integration, a remote MCP integration on the marketplace for Salesforce in your app, now someone else can go and see that, find it, and say, well, I want to use that now. And so it's really democratizing access to data. And that's really, really important as these agents and these systems, workflows, need access to valuable context and valuable tools to do things. It is providing a sort of sea of information, a sea of context available to any enterprise to now build those applications. So it's been an incredibly important inflection point, as I talked about earlier, like what are the things that move us from just a simple chatbot to full agentic systems? It's model intelligence, tools, and access to products that wrap all of those things together. MCP has been an incredibly important inflection point in access to tools.
Awesome, Scott. Just being conscious of time, I'd love to sort of end this conversation on sort of a forward-looking statement. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe what you're most excited about? We've kind of entered this new era of AI with agents and autonomous systems that can, operate for 7 hours at a time. What's next? And I guess, what keeps you up at night, or sort of, what gets you excited to wake up and start working every day? What are those things that you're really looking forward to over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I think if you look at coding as the early example of early adopters who have a lot of agency to build the things that they want to build, I think you can start to see what the future looks like by seeing that coding is a little bit ahead of what the rest of the market might be ahead on. So you see things like Claude Code get developed and sort of shipped. That is a full, again, agentic system where you have like a software engineer running around, writing a bunch of code, analyzing the code base. The same concepts, I don't think, have been deployed to the broader set of people outside of professional software engineers yet. And so I'm very excited for both building systems and building software to become easier and more democratized for more people like me, who I'm now building those production features, making that more accessible to people who are not professional developers. But I think also taking the same concepts of these full agentic systems and helping non-technical people change the way that they think about their role by being able to make longer running agents that take the key parts of their process and allow them to act more as sort of collaborators or managers of a bunch of agents, helping them do their work and expanding their professional skill set beyond where they currently are. I think that's one thing. I think once you go a little bit crazier and a little bit farther out, I think you just start to see like, well, you're now working with an agent who's kind of like one, really capable person that you're kind of managing. What happens when you're managing an organization, right? What happens when you're managing an organization of agents? Wow. And how can everyone be their own mini CPO or CEO? And I don't think that's too far away. And so I don't exactly know what that looks like, but that's the kind of thing that I wake up and I want to get there.
You've just made me really excited to go start using this stuff. Thank you so much, everyone. Please, round of applause for Scott from Anthropic, Scott White. Thank you.
Thank you.